For a lot of people, one of Trump's biggest positives was his apparent focus on freedom. Freedoms can obviously mean different things for different people. You know, some people want to be free to carry guns, while other people want to be free from the chokehold of capitalism. But the one that comes before all others is the freedom to share ideas and access information. Every progressive movement has to start with those involved accessing information and then making it more public. Previously, Elizabeth Warren used to be the champion, and in recent years it's become Trump. Whether either of these truly believe this or found it politically convenient as their opponents were trying to restrict information is absolutely debatable. And although I don't think their intent necessarily detracts from their position, the real champions of free speech are the ones who do it to change the world, even when it was against their best interests. Before being progressive was about making sure that biological females would never hold a world record again, it was about genuine freedom of information. Freedom to know how many civilians your taxpayer-funded drone strikes killed, or freedom to challenge scientific studies with unusually positive results for the big companies that funded them. Now, as long as these scientists put their pronouns in their bios and big companies put multicolored logos up once a year, we've decided that any questioning of them means we're somehow against the groups they pretend to stand for. These big government, tech, and media structures are the exact institutions that people like Aaron Swartz, Edward Snowden, and Julian Assange fought against. Yet it's like we've forgotten all the truly horrible shit that the US did before 2016. Or we genuinely get more offended by trans people not being allowed in the army than the hundreds and thousands of civilians those not diverse enough US troops kill. For me, this is the issue that brings all true liberals together. Aaron Swartz has been hounded by the FBI until he took his own life in 2013. Edward Snowden has been granted permanent residency in Russia, but Julian Assange is still incarcerated for exposing crimes while the criminals who committed them run free. Trump believed that pardoning Julian Assange would lead to harsher impeachment, removing his ability to run again. This is seen by some as forward-thinking, as he has an opportunity in the future to make political change, while others it's seen as him disregarding what is right in favour of what's politically convenient, not unlike the swamp rats he was fighting against. Our ability to debate and fight for what's important relies entirely on us being able to access accurate information. Yes, we can fight about politics, but the fight for information control is as old as information itself. Now, this one's tricky for me to sit on the fence because the ability to sit on the fence is a casualty of the war on information. You cannot look at both sides of an argument if one or both is censored. Regardless, I'll do my best. Every topic I covered today could easily be a video on their own, but I think covering them together shows what we're dealing with and shows how this problem isn't going away. Julian Assange, the creator of WikiLeaks, is considered a hero of open access information to some and a terrorist and alleged rapist to others. WikiLeaks, promising to only give true and relevant information to the public, so far has kept this promise, never having to make a retraction. Julian Assange showed us footage of people being mowed down by US helicopters in the streets. It opened our eyes to the scale and scope of the US government spying and the mass murder of civilians by drone strikes. It showed links between oil companies, politicians, and favourable scientific results. It showed Bernie Sanders was internally called a doofus by the Democratic Party, and then robbed of his candidacy in 2016, where he should have rightfully been up against Donald Trump. As you can imagine, the US wasn't too happy with little Julian. These sort of stories go directly against decades of Hollywood enforcing the idea that Americans are heroes, and the guys with the turbans are evil. Since 2012, Assange has been hiding or in asylum while fighting extradition to the US. His in-depth look into what the US does to its enemies probably makes extradition to the US feel about as safe as extradition to China. The key thing here to remember is nothing he said was wrong. Yes, there was a lot of sensitive information, but sensitive to who? It seems more than anything, this information was specifically things the US government didn't want its own citizens to know. They weren't leaks of private information to the public. This was leaking of public information that had been kept private. The government belongs to the people, not the other way around. Another important point here was the leaked information wasn't exclusively detrimental to one party, but more the elites who, regardless of what party holds power, seem to be along for the ride as their families grow exponentially richer. This is exactly why Democrats like Hillary Clinton and Republicans like Mitch McConnell have stood directly in opposition to him, because he stood with the public. Aaron Swartz was another fighter for internet freedom. He coded an open source editable encyclopedia well before Wikipedia, winning him a school prize at age 12, and by 13 he was developing RSS, which is sort of a predecessor to what social media pages use as feeds, but it's still widely used. This guy was a genius at understanding systems, both computer and social. He grew up online and found conventional education absurd. If he wanted to learn geometry, he'd read a geometry book, not go into a room and have someone who'd read that book try explain it to him.
I was very frustrated with school. I thought, the teachers didn't know what they were talking about, and they were very domineering and controlling, and the homework was kind of a sham, and it was just like, all the way to pin students together and force them to do busy work. And, I started reading books about like the history of education and how this educational system was developed, and alternatives to it in ways that people could actually learn things as opposed to just regurgitating facts their teachers told them. And that kind of led me down this path of questioning things. Once I questioned the school I was in, I questioned the society that built the school, I questioned the businesses that the schools were training people for, and I questioned the government that, set up this whole structure.
Aaron did a few things that attracted the attention of the FBI, but I think it was his manifesto that seemed to scare them the most.
Information is power, but like all power, there are those who want to keep it for themselves. The world's entire scientific and cultural heritage, published over centuries in books and journals, is increasingly being digitized and locked up by a handful of private corporations. Meanwhile, those who have been locked out are not standing idly by. You've been sneaking through holes and climbing over fences, liberating the information locked up by the publishers and sharing them with your friends. But all this action goes on in the dark, hidden underground. It's called stealing or piracy, as if sharing a wealth of knowledge were the moral equivalent of plundering a ship and murdering its crew. But sharing isn't immoral, it's a moral imperative. Only those blinded by greed would refuse to let a friend make a copy. There's no justice in following unjust laws. It's time to come into the light and, in the grand tradition of civil disobedience, declare our opposition to this private theft of public culture.
Aaron definitely didn't only write it though, he lived it. All US files in the public domain were accessible on a service that had an unusable interface and cost 10 cents a page. When the public rightfully challenged the fact that they had to pay to see their own laws, it was fixed by opening 17 libraries across America with free access. That's one every 220,000 square miles, which for reference is about the size of France. It was at this time Aaron came across a group known as the Thumb Drive Corps, who were encouraged to go to these libraries, download files, and then re-upload them on a free online service that everyone could access. Schwartz obviously liked this idea, and after joining, within hours of being shown a code that could download the database, he had rewritten the code, perfected it, had a friend trial it at one of the free access libraries, and had re-uploaded 20 million pages of documents, over 750 gigabytes of data. He had made the public domain publicly accessible, which was a great start, but not quite the guerrilla access he desired. As he pointed out in his manifesto, the real issue was all of human discovery and history being digitized and easy to access, but only allowed to be seen by the select few. Google employees and university students in the US can educate themselves, but why not those in the public or universities from poorer countries? Thankfully, he was one of the privileged few, and true to his call to action, he used his skills to access MIT to download en masse journal articles from a company named JSTOR. The FBI took this terrorist threat seriously.
Schwartz faces up to 35 years in prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release, restitution, forfeiture, and a fine of up to $1 million.
He was bailed out on $100,000. However, even when JSTOR dropped the charges, the FBI continued to pursue him. His clear ability to access information, his manifesto admitting his intent, and his rumoured ties to WikiLeaks was a risk the US government couldn't take. And although he made some incredible political movements in the year awaiting the trial, the pressure eventually became too much for him. As his mother puts it,
Internet's own boy, and the old world killed him.
We are standing in the middle of a time when great injustice is not touched. The architects of the financial meltdown have dinner with the president regularly. In the middle of that time, the idea that this was what the government had to prosecute just seems absurd if it weren't tragic.
there have been a select few internet age geniuses. The ones who wanted wealth are wealthy. The ones who wanted political change are incarcerated or dead. The obvious question with these two is, are they wrong? Information is unquestionably powerful, but is the amount of access we have since the age of the internet more than we can handle? Is there things that it's in the best interest of the public not to know? Maybe. We've seen the damage that can be done by, say, a holy text. So is giving people uncensored access to information only helping these hateful ideas spread? Well, on the holy text example, When are holy texts most dangerous? When people have limited access to information and rely solely on their text, or when they have open access to information and are allowed to make up their own minds? I can also see the argument where certain military secrets are needed to be kept from potential enemies. National security is a long-standing excuse for censorship, but I guess I understand that in some situations it could also be true. The problem, as always, is where is the line? And while I'm not entirely sure there is a line or where it goes, I'm positive that I don't trust the ones who are currently drawing it. In a book called The Wisdom of Crowds, the author James describes what he calls a wise crowd, and while what makes them up is relatively ordinary, what they can accomplish is incredible. A wise crowd basically has two parameters. Firstly, a crowd should be made up of people with diverse opinions. Secondly, each individual in the crowd must make their decision independent of anyone else's. Basically, you can't influence each other. Initially, it was theorized that the average wisdom of the crowd is more accurate than any individual in the crowd, even if that individual is an expert in the field. This was tested at the 1906 Plymouth Fair when 800 random people tried to guess the weight of an ox. If anyone guessed it correctly, once it was slaughtered, they were allowed to take home all the meat. And while there were many people who were considered experts, such as butchers or farmers, nobody quite got it right. If you were, however, to take the average of the crowd, you'll find that it's within 1% of the actual weight of the ox. There was enough people above the correct answer than there were below the correct answer, so the aggregate found the center. If, however, someone was to yell out their guess, then all other guesses would be influenced by the one they heard, and the crowd would no longer be considered wise. This is already crazy enough, but in recent studies it's shown that wise crowds can outperform small groups of experts. The fact that crowds are intelligent is proven. This is why our personal data is so valuable to companies. The obvious issue is how to keep a crowd from being influenced. This seems impossible with social media and news in our ears, but to ensure the aggregate is still correct, we need to make sure people are not influenced more by one side than another. Crowds are only wise if they have free access to information and independence from authority when making decisions. This means any silencing of people, regardless of how much you disagree with them, takes us further away from the correct answer. On top of this, James also points out the need for accurate methods of aggregation of results and trust in those presenting them. But I think we can all agree there shouldn't be any issues there. We are told that people are stupid and that information is hidden to protect us from ourselves, but people are smart, and anyone who censors information is accidentally or intentionally causing the public to come to the wrong answer. Aaron Swartz saw the problem before most of us even understood what the internet was.
In the old system of broadcasting, you were fundamentally limited by the amount of space in the airwaves. You could only send out 10 channels over the airwaves of television, right? Or even with cable, you had 500 channels. On the internet, everybody can have a channel. Everyone can get a blog or a MySpace page. Everyone has a way of expressing themselves. And so what you see now is not a question of who gets access to the airwaves. It's a question of who gets control over the ways you find people. You start seeing power centralizing in sites like Google, these sort of gatekeepers that tell you where on the internet you want to go, the people who provide you your sources of news and information. So it's not, only certain people have a license to speak. Now everyone has a license to speak. It's a question of who gets heard.
It was this documentary that made me want to make this video, and I highly recommend watching it. But as important as Aaron's story is, it's unfortunately too late for him. It's not, however, too late for Julian Assange and to do what's right for the cause that Aaron lost his life for. A key part of this Russian investigation was into Trump's connections to WikiLeaks. When detrimental information came out about the Democrats, this was reported as Russian disinformation, even though WikiLeaks has never posted an unverified claim. There's a very good chance that these stories heavily affected the election, and they absolutely should have. If the public finding out the truth about what you did causes them to vote for your opponent, this isn't your opponent's fault, or the public's, or the publisher's. It's yours. We used to care about keeping private information private and letting public information be seen by everyone. Now we are happy to let Facebook track our GPS everywhere we go and connect to a microphone in our pocket as long as they promise to keep negative stories about the politicians we like out of the news. Julian Assange definitely wasn't an ally to the US government, but he was in the truest sense an ally to the people, including those who live in the US. Now we have companies like Disney who act progressive by having multicultural princesses, but openly thanking Chinese Uyghur Muslim re-education camps in the credits of Mulan. It doesn't matter how inspiring that movie was to young females, if it was built off the back of literal camps, it's not progressive. It's using progressive ideas as a marketing tool. If the government is spending time fighting for transgender rights but describes the mass slaughter of Muslims as cultural differences, then they aren't progressive. They are using progressive ideas as a campaign tool.
The central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow.
I know I'm a bit all over the shop here, but I guess the takeaway would be the only reason we've had these necessary political movements in the past is because we've had access to information and the ability to share ideas. Don't be fooled by anyone who stands by what you currently believe is important, but is taking away the ability to have any progressive movements in the future. Aaron Swartz talks about the internet being both a way to control people and a way to free people.
There's sort of these two polarizing perspectives, right? Everything is great. The internet has created all this freedom and liberty and everything's going to be fantastic. Or everything is terrible. The internet has created all these tools for cracking down and spying and, controlling what we say. And I think both are true, right? The internet has done both. And both are kind of amazing and astonishing. And which one will win out in the long run is up to us.
I'd grow on this by saying it has the capacity to allow us to share our individuality and grow as a species, or remove our individuality and become a hive mind. Julian Assange definitely isn't the only person who deserves to be free, and I'm sure the idea that this is Trump's biggest mistake is laughable to some of you. I'm sure a lot of you think that Trump running for president was his biggest mistake, while others think it was him not locking up Hillary. I think when you've got this much power, not standing up for free speech is the biggest mistake you can make. I think Trump's biggest mistake was him not pardoning Julian Assange and showing everyone who believes in true liberal values, left and right, that the truth cannot be criminalized anymore. That is the end, but if you enjoyed the video and want to see more, I'd really appreciate a subscribe. I'm getting close to 1,000, and I've decided 1,000 I'm going to do a bucket hat reveal. Even if you found this topic boring, you cannot stand there and tell me you're not excited by bucket hats. Also, if you've got any interesting videos you want me to watch or topics you want me to cover, chuck it down in the comments. I've been really enjoying having chats down there. Cheers.